Was that I was looking for like a blueprint of how to act, right? That I felt jealous that there were, role models of other ethnicities, and that there's a long storied heritage of particular ethnic groups, right? But being half Japanese, being half Asian, I didn't really have many people to look up to.
Do you have any interesting intro ideas? Like my friend, he actually sang like a little bit of Eminem. He was like, "If I wasn't, why would I say I am?" But if something pops into your head,
Yeah.
go for it.
I could sing something.
Do you want to?
Yeah. Is it recording right now?
I'll say, and we're live. Okay.
Okay.
And we're live.
The Post Definitions Podcast.
I'm Freddie Lancia,
I'm Makoto Take.
and this is the Post Definitions Podcast. Welcome, Makoto. So happy to have you here.
Thanks for having me. My first time doing anything like this, so
Wow.
I'm thrilled.
But you do have some experience with some audio recording.
Yeah, a little bit. I'm an amateur, but this is a good experience.
You only identify as an amateur, but
Yeah.
the way I see you,
I appreciate it.
way up here.
We get to see.
So Makoto and I have been friends for a long time. All my non-American listeners will be excited to hear he's a frat brother.
We're bros.
Brothers for life. Blood brothers.
Yeah. The frat really comes out when you talk about fratness.
Yeah. Europeans love to ask me about what is that? What is that like to be
Right.
a frat guy? And I'm never so interested in my answer, nor am I able to really think of a good answer. I think.
Sure.
Yeah. What do you think? Are you interested in your frat identity? Do you identify as a frat guy? And are you like ready to tell people, all kinds of people, like, yeah, I was in a frat? Or what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think I don't think I was ever a poster child of what it means to be a frat bro, being a frat guy. But I'm not ever really afraid to bring it up because I feel like I own my identity and I own my experiences. And, I guess depending on the environment, maybe, I would feel weird about bringing it up. But at the same time, it informs who I am. And I'm not afraid of that or ashamed of it, and I'm proud of the things that I did while I was a frat bro. And I got out of it what I would like to, and I see the system for what it is. So I'm very at peace with my identity of a reformed frat brother.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, I really personally enjoyed my time in the frat. I feel like I made the most out of it. There's certainly something to be said about the stereotypical frat guy and fitting that mold and being that frat dude, going to every party and like gaming with girls and
You mean like video gaming?
yeah, exactly.
Of course.
Yeah. And ignoring your obligations and being an all-around delinquent. But the other side of that is, the reason why frats exist is to bring guys together for a higher purpose and to connect, to build brotherhood, and to lift each other up, hold each other to a higher ideal.
What's that higher purpose for you?
I think that it depends on the frat, probably. I was really drawn to, we were Phi Kappa size. We were Phi size.
Live ever, die never, Phi Kappa Psi.
Live ever, die never. Leading. I was really drawn to the idea of the great joy of serving other was one of the ideals of the fraternity. But beyond that, I think that what would the higher purpose be? Like holding each other accountable, whether directly or indirectly, for success, and going through the experiences and the throes of a frat guy to become closer to a group of people that hopefully you come out on the other end a better person for. Like I think it definitely taught me, it helped refine my character. And when you're thrown into a room of, a pledge class of like 25 and in a house of like 60 people.
So, by the way, a pledge class is just the group of people your age, or maybe, just first year in the frat.
Right, the people that join the fraternity the same year as you do, that you go through a process called, pledging, and there's a whole process with which you join the fraternity, and then you become a pledge, and then you do stuff, you learn about the fraternity, you go through some trials and tribulations, and then you are initiated, and then you are a brother. So the people that you pledge with and the people that you are initiated with become your pledge class. But yeah, when you're in such a large group of people, and especially college-age guys that are in a fraternity, you could either be caught in trying to go with the flow, or you are forced to really define who you are and to boldly be yourself amongst all of that. So I really felt like that gave me a chance to hone in on my character and to learn how to enjoy myself around others a little bit better and in a healthier way after doing it not healthily, but also understanding more like what maybe like a stereotypical identity would be, and what parts of that do I resonate with and what parts do I not. I feel like, what did I get out of it? I feel like I got more refined social skills. I got a greater appreciation for building a network of people that you want to, that are a reflection of you, that are also, held to similar ideals that you want to be like. And yeah, like more so than you probably would in a dorm, at least. In a dormitory you have like a roommate and maybe you make friends with on the floor, but you're you have to build the network up, and there's something to be said for that, I think. Obviously, like this, people that make criticisms of a fraternity say that, oh, you bought your friends, but I don't think that I wouldn't have joined the fraternity to buy a network, right? I joined the fraternity because I liked the people that were there, especially the people that got me into the fraternity. So, like, by the way, there's a process before you are a pledge. You rush a fraternity, which means you kind of shop around at the different fraternities. You see what the guys are like, and I really liked the older members that showed me the fraternity. All of them were striving for success, and they're all doing really, really cool things. And I liked that, and I felt like I had a lot to learn from them. And I feel like I gained a lot from them as well. So, yeah, I'd say I'm very proud of my identity being a frat. And, like I said earlier also, like that's not in ignorance of the darker side of being a fraternity, right? I mean, there's sexual assault that happens. There is hazing, right? Like, there are bad sides of that. And there's an iceberg there, but I try to keep aware of that and stay, the course through that. I was on the grievance committee, which means that if there's interpersonal problems between members, you bring it up to you raise a grievance with a council, and it's arbitrated through that council. So I try to help be a voice of reason for other people that might have gotten lost in the throes of being in a fraternity, and holding each other accountable in that sense, right? So yeah, I'm a frat guy, you know what I mean? Even though that's not my entire identity, I had an identity before that. It's another facet of myself that I wear proudly, and I got out of it what I would like to have. you know, yeah.
Yeah, that's so awesome. Definitely everything has its pros and cons, but it sounds like you really made the most of it. And yeah, both of us together, we what did we do? We sorry, I actually had one of my brain
Yeah, all
moments
good.
strain, so probably just gonna cut this moment out. But now that I'm talking, I think I'm good now. So what I wanted to say, and then I'll start the recording again. Is like, what's this? What position did we both have? Where you were before me?
Right. We were on the philanthropy committee,
Exactly, philanthropy. Yeah, exactly.
and that's another cool aspect of it too.
Here, so I'll say, yeah, yeah, like so you had a certain focus you wanted to focus on, and that was philanthropy, the great joy of helping others. And Makoto was actually part of my inspiration for doing the same the next year, and he taught me like what I needed to do, and so we were both part of that. And there's so much you can get involved with in the frat that everyone can get what they need out of it, right? But I wonder if you felt that it was a more difficult place than other environments. You were talking about being yourself,
Right.
versus really owning who you are. And I mean, it's so important for me to find a place where you can own who you are. But are there some people that actually find it harder to be who they are in this situation, and they would do better outside of the frats, where they might actually find who they are?
Yeah, and that's a great point as well. That I think one of the things that helped sharpen my character, that helped me figure out who I was that coming, like trying to live with people that weren't prioritizing their own self identity and trying to live the life of a frat guy. And there's like that kind of an identity of like, we're going to go out all the time, you're going to act a certain way, like a toxic masculinity kind of a thing. And that was a difficult part of it. Like, I definitely know that there were people that I was living amongst that would criticize me, whether to my face or behind closed doors, about how I was different. And so you are certainly under a microscope more than hardly any other environment. Your actions are judged, they're evaluated, they're talked about. You can get kicked out of a fraternity, especially if you mess up, like a sexual assault kind of a case, or if you just don't fit the vibe of the brotherhood. And so there's a little bit of compromise you have to make, but also, if you can, for some people that maybe are not at a point where they're secure within themselves, then joining a frat can be very problematic, because then you want to have the same identity as these people, and you sacrifice yourself in order to not stand out from the crowd, to avoid those labels, to avoid being talked about behind closed doors, right? And I think that that's probably a social pressure that is non-unique to fraternities, but it is very, like, the magnitude with which that you're examined is higher, and so it's kind of like a pressure cooker in that sense.
I would agree. It's more intense.
Definitely.
For sure. And not just with people with judgment, because I honestly, one of my greatest feelings towards the frat in a good way is how non-judgmental I felt the people were. They were so okay with you, with their brothers making mistakes. Right. It was such a great opportunity, a great place to not be afraid to make mistakes all the time, because everyone was just like fucked up and making mistakes all the time. And it was like such a great environment to be accepted for your mistakes.
Absolutely. And it's cool because then you have a group of people that love you and care about you, that if you make a mistake, they'll pick you back up from there. And they genuinely do care about you, especially through the things you go through. That's what the brotherhood is good for.
In my personal experience, I felt like you learn lessons fast because you make mistakes fast.
Right.
And you're sort of in a position where, like, yeah, you might end up doing something that's not you, but you do it to such an extent that you realize it's not you. Whereas other people, you know, in a normal life, they might get into some social situations or drugs that they don't want to, but they'll do it just on the weekends, and it'll never be quite too much, and then they'll never give it up. But like in the frat, you do it like every day, and then you realize this isn't me, and you'll cut it out completely.
Right. I think there's something to be said about the all or nothing sentiment of a fraternity. There's the idea of sending and going full send, right? On a given night out, the idea of like full sending the night and just blacking out drunk or being blackout drunk and going all in, you are given a choice, right? And when you first start out, I feel like most people, for whatever reason, don't have the personal resolve to say no. Especially because when you say no too much, then people start to say like, is this really for you? Like, are you really getting out what you want from this thing? It takes maturity to see those temptations and to back away from them. But I guess what I'm trying to get at is that like, being in a frat, you're in a very like a hyper environment, right, where everything is to a full extent, and you are often pushed to a limit, whether that's drinking every day to a large extent, blacking out every day, kind of a thing, because everything is available to you. If you want to hang out with people until 2 a.m. every day, you can. There's always going to be somebody that's around to hang out with you. If you want to do every drug in the world, that is also an avenue that is out there and available. And that's not unique to being in a fraternity, but I guess being in a collection of people where going out and partying is a regular thing, you are pushed to a limit. And I mean, that's how I personally find myself growing usually, is like I usually need to go all the way in and find a limit where I have to back away from that, and then I find a healthier middle ground.
Definitely.
Which is maybe not the healthiest thing in the world, but it's usually how I know, like, okay, like I can do it to this extent, and this is my threshold. If I go over this, then I know that I'm going to somewhere that I definitely don't want, and at least I have that knowledge, and I can toe that line with a more informed perspective rather than somebody that does it on occasion and is afraid to find out. You know, it's like, as the saying goes, to fuck around is human and to find out is divine.
Cool. Yeah, I think that it makes you strong in certain ways of standing up for what you believe in. If you don't know what you believe yet and you don't know why you do the things you do, you're going to end up doing things that aren't you. Like, right. You come to college, you don't really drink that much, but you don't really know why. And then as soon as someone's telling you, like, drink this, and you don't have a good excuse why you don't want to, you're like, well, I mean, I don't normally do that. They're like, come on, drink it. And you're like, all right, whatever.
Right.
You know, you have to find out your why, and then you can be who you want to be. Like, if you are someone who's strong enough to say, like, I don't drink, and here's why, or I don't drink, and I don't need a why, I don't care, this is me, people will respect that.
Yeah.
But if you don't have, like, it teaches you to, like, make mistakes and figure out who you are and stand by yourself. Absolutely. In the heat of social pressure and all this stuff. So, yeah, it will make you make mistakes and then stand up for yourself, I think, in my experience. And you will come out stronger. And, you know, obviously some people could argue it would be better if you didn't make those mistakes in the first place. But like Makoto said, we are human.
Yeah.
And sometimes you got to make some mistakes.
Yeah. I think that's where the true knowledge comes from, you know. And you can learn those mistakes like by seeing other people make those mistakes. Some people are able to avoid those mistakes altogether because they can see the outcome. But for me, I'm the kind of guy that needs to find out, you know. And that, I think, allows me to make more informed decisions. Well, let's see. What else is interesting about being in a frat? Um,
Well, maybe how it changed how you think of yourself now versus before
yeah.
could be interesting. I mean, I'm interested in general in like um, how identity changes, especially because you were talking about being initiated, and it's like, did that change overnight? That one day you weren't a frat guy, and the next you were just, I'm in a frat, and I'm initiated, and I earned this. How quickly did that change in your head, and what was
Yeah.
that like?
I think that, being a frat guy is a mentality thing, and it's almost like a religion. So I think when you rush a fraternity, you are you have the becomings of a frat guy. And I think when you start pledging, I think that that is a fair starting point of being a frat guy. Like you can have aspects of being a frat guy before that. I would say that I am a frat brother in the sense that I was in a fraternity, but I never really felt like I was in the mold of a true frat guy. I would go out when I wanted to, and but otherwise I had my bounds and I tried to live my own life as much as I could. And I think I tried to live to the ideals of a frat guy, one that keeps takes care of his brothers, one that serves his community, and one that is striving towards a higher ideal and a worthy ideal. Um, I think maybe as I have more, as I'm 25 now. I did a fifth year in college. I moved out of the frat my senior year, so I spent 3 years in the fraternity. So I have about 3 years of separation from actually living there. And I'd say that um, hmm, yeah, I guess because I wasn't, I didn't really feel like a frat guy. Like I felt like I was the least frat guy, you know. Um, I think maybe because of that, I'm not sure that my identity has changed much with respect to that frat identity. I've definitely had to unlearn some uh, speaking behaviors because maybe it's still uh, detectable. I think in my voice sometimes. Um, you learn certain vocal tendencies and a way to talk when you're around a bunch of guys and in a fraternity. Um, but other than that, I would say that I haven't. I think that maybe a lot of people look back on their frat experience and they're not very proud of that identity and they look back in with some amount of regret. And so their post college and post frat experience is about distancing themselves from that identity and growing outside of it. But since I had an eye towards being the person that I am while being in a frat, I I don't feel like my I don't think I've had to put any distance between myself and the frat because I always held it at about the length that I wanted it. And so the ways that I've grown, I've added more to my identity, but I don't think that I think that um, I'm a more responsible drinker these days maybe, and uh, hmm, but I think that my identity has changed for due to the circumstances of my life external to the frat and not because of trying to trying to become a different person than I was as a frat guy.
Yeah, it seems like a really healthy way of looking at it.
Yeah, thanks. Um, I think you and I both had unique experiences being in the frat because I feel like you're a similar guy, and everybody gets caught up in the throes of being a frat guy initially, but I feel like you were able to maintain a very strong sense of self. But how would you characterize your, like, how close were you to that frat identity? Did you have to shed any of it? Were there any parts that, did you ever get to a point where you weren't proud of the person that you had become or were becoming?
Oh, well, normally I'm like strained from answering like direct questions about me because
okay.
like it's a interview for you, but I will go ahead and answer because we're really talking about something that's relevant to both of us. And I just remember moments where I went off the deep end and I thought, what, this isn't me. And it made me really dive into who I was just even like a day later.
Right.
That usually just had to do with like, oh wow, I just realized I drank so much alcohol recently, and I don't want to do that, and that's not really, and it really took me a long time as well to like for that to sink in so much that I wouldn't like start again a few months later or something like this. But yeah, I never was specifically, maybe when I was a freshman, I like owned being in a frat so much, but I think that quickly faded. I know that just after my first year, I went and traveled in Europe for 4 months, and when I came back, I was definitely less impressed by the lifestyle, and I feel like I was also immature at the time in the way that like I couldn't make the most of it. Whereas like now, like this time I came back home after living abroad for the last year and a half, I've really been able to make the most of my time at home. And instead of being like, oh, this isn't as good in this way, this way, this way. So I learned how to see like the like the good things in everything.
Right.
And I know that there are lots of good things in the lifestyle of the frat. And so it would have been cool if I could go abroad for those 4 months and come back and been like, wow, that was cool. Oh, and this is so cool that I'm back here. Because I know that all the people I met in Europe would love to have this experience of coming to the US and trying out being in a frat. Like, wow, so cool. But I, at the moment, thought, too good for this now, you know? And that's not cool at all, you know? So, I don't know if that answers your question.
No, 100%.
Now, why don't you just give us some context to who you are and just a little bit about your own identity?
Yeah, I can give a broad strokes overview. I am a half Japanese, half German male, cis. I'm 25. I was born in Tokyo to a mother of a German American mother and a Japanese father. I moved to the U.S. when I was about 1, and I grew up in South Seattle in Burien. I moved to SeaTac eventually in first grade. I went to Montessori school up until through kindergarten, and then my mother is a grade school teacher, and I actually attended her elementary school in Kent when I was a young lad. I went to middle school in Kent, which is an interesting experience. And then I went to a very interesting high school called Aviation, which was kind of like a magnet school where you are focused on STEM and engineering, and it's like a professional high school. It's really weird, like a small high school. Maybe we can talk about that later. Anyhow, and then I went to college. Didn't really know what I wanted to do. The physics was the one subject from high school that really resonated with me and made me interested in the underpinnings of what's out there and what's it like and how does it work. And then I got inspired, maybe both by psychedelics and a class that I took about the introduction to neuroscience, about how does this meat computer that we have work, and for closer to get at, or maybe switching over from like a metaphysical, philosophical pursuit to a more epistemological thing of like, why am I thinking the way that I am? So yeah, I studied the brain. Thought I would be a neuroscientist. I took the bio introductory sequence and found very quickly that I don't think like a biologist. But my mathematics and my computer science classes were most fruitful and the most natural subjects for me. And then I found a interdisciplinary field called computational neuroscience that attempts to model the brain and its activity and draw insight from the data that we can gather from it. And that's where my passion has been. I actually ended up completing a math degree with a minor in applied math and a minor in neural computation and engineering. I did a 5th year, and then I kind of just freeballed for a long time. I was a server at a restaurant. I worked at the same Italian restaurant for 4 years. And the year after I graduated, I was pretty burnt out, so I just lived the life of a restaurant server for a while until this last summer. And now I live in Eugene, Oregon, where I'm working on helping my family out for the most part, working on turning my grandparents' old house into like an Airbnb, pretty much, and figuring out my place in life and what I want.
Wow, thank you, Makoto. That's
It's not a very it's not a very brief introduction, but
no, but super interesting. And yeah, where to start? So it seems like your identity kind of changed quite a few times, and maybe just starting with your school experience that you mentioned. Do you think it's in general a healthy thing, or potentially negative to maybe take a biology class and decide I'm not a biological thinker? And do you think that maybe if you took a different biology class, maybe with a different teacher, something like this, you could have had a different fate with how you think and just how you see yourself?
yeah, absolutely. I think that I had to come to that conclusion because of the circumstances of the school that we attended. We went to the University of Washington, and it's a weird structure because oftentimes when you get into a college, you're pretty much going to study the thing that you want to study. In the University of Washington, you're not guaranteed to study the thing that you truly want to study because the majors, especially some of the more prestigious ones like computer science or any of the engineering disciplines, and often pretty much most of the science, technology, engineering fields, you have to apply into the major after you've already gotten admitted into the school. So that's based on how you do in the introductory sequence classes. And I wanted to be a I wanted to be a neuroscientist. And because of how I did in the biology classes, neuroscience, my GPA was not going to be good enough to get into the neuroscience major. So I had the option to either go to a different school to truly pursue that, or to switch directions and to change course and pivot. And yeah, I mean, I still think about that choice. I ended up with a math degree, and I'm glad that I did it for a lot of reasons. But there's something to be said too about, I'm passionate about neuroscience, and I do wish that I was able to actually study that to the extent that I was hoping for. I mean, I was able to carve a route out for myself because the University of Washington happened to have a great computational neuroscience program. But I always wonder, like, what happened? What if I decided to go elsewhere and truly pursue that?
Well, getting a degree in math is not easy, and if you're not super passionate about it, I can't imagine that making it any easier.
Yeah.
Do you feel like, I know that you were sort of forced in from one major to the other, but you also did, I'm sure, go through a bit of self-discovery as you took these classes. Are you happy that you went through that discovery period of like what you want to study at university? Or would you rather have been maybe from one of these countries where if you're not fully ready to go to university at 18, maybe you take a few years off? Like that's pretty typical in Europe, I think South America maybe. And they find it pretty bizarre that we would go to university without a major set.
That's a great question. I think there's pros and cons there. I think I am. The pros there was that. Sorry. I think the pros of having to go through a discovery phase in my first few years of college are that the introductory classes give you a very good sense of what the material is, and they oftentimes tied it into what the bigger picture is within those fields. And there's a lot of resources on a college campus to really dive deep into a bunch of different things, right? And so I feel like I was able to give myself some exposure therapy. I don't think my problem was that I was trying to choose, but I didn't know what was out there that I wanted to do. I spent a lot of my early life asking other people what they thought that I would be good at because I had no idea what an aspiration for myself would look like. So being on a college campus and seeing like like there's a web page from the UW system that shows you all of the college disciplines and all of the majors that you can get, and seeing a list of, okay, here's all the things that I can do, and there were names on there that I had no idea or ever heard about. You can click on them, and then what does the course structure of them look like, and how interested I am in that. And I spent a lot of time diving into that, and that was a good exploratory phase for me. Obviously, the con is that that's a price, and you have to pay for that education. I think that I'm incredibly grateful that I was in a position to afford that. Granted, I also didn't pay for that. I'm even more privileged that my parents were financially stable enough to be able to pay for my college education and save up for that. But do I wish that I didn't have to pay for it? I didn't have to be in a college system, and that I could start college knowing what I would like to do? I would say so. But I'm not sure entirely either that. Well, I guess so. To clarify, when you take like a couple of gap years in some of those other countries, as you mentioned, is there a formal system to do exploring, or is it pretty much just the culture to have a gap year or two and then figure it out on your own and then come back to it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that there is not a formal system. They leave education and they maybe find a job, think about things, learn, talk to people, and then when they're ready or they find something that's worth them studying, then they jump in. And that's really interesting as well because a country like Denmark, for instance, where university is actually free, it's actually paid for by the state. Like they pay you. It's almost a crazy idea to think that anyone would, in the end, choose not to go.
Right.
Right. But it does feel like they do have this this culture of like, even though we, get paid to go, we're still gonna wait until we make it worth it. Or maybe I'm misreading that action. I don't know. I think it's just in their culture.
Yeah.
To wait until they know what they're gonna do.
Well, with that context, then I would say, no, I'm glad that I went straight into college because I don't know what I would have done with my time other than that. And I needed exposure therapy to what careers are out there, what disciplines are there to study. Because I love knowledge and I love learning. And so my problem was that I didn't know what all there was out there to study and to learn. and what fields I could get into. And I feel like I had already been gaining a lot of life experience, and I had a couple of jobs through high school. Just like I worked at McDonald's, and I worked at a museum, and I worked retail. And if I took like a gap year or something like that, I don't know that I would have ultimately answered the question of what do I want to do in college without going onto a course website and like looking at all that a college has to offer, you know? So I think, right. I think that that is a pro of doing it, that you're in an opportunity rich environment, and there's a lot of resource to access to figure that out. But I think that speaks more to a problem with the college system, that they really do their best to push you out of there within 4 years or whatever, however many, 5 years if you have to. If I could, I probably would have taken much more time to really dive into everything that I would have liked to learn about. And then once I was confident that I had found something that I was passionate about and felt fairly good at, then I could totally commit to that thing. But I don't think that I would have found the things that I had found in a timely manner had I not been at the school that I was and in the environment that I was. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Now you have me wondering, like, what kinds of things can be learned, about what you want to study outside of university. And I do feel like in university, like you said, you love to study and you knew that. So university is probably the place for you. But maybe for some people, there's too much of a focus on like, what is there to study and what's it like to study that, and less of a focus on, I don't know, what do I want out of life?
Right.
And then people who maybe go and take a gap year, they maybe explore what life can be like, and then they answer the question, how do I get there? And maybe then they see what they need to study or that they don't need to study or something like this.
Right.
I don't know. And I have another question for you. Yeah, so I just wanted to take a moment to highlight something you said, that Americans have the need to get their college, to pay for their college, and some of us, our parents, we're lucky enough to have parents who could pay for it, and others do not. And I was wondering how that affects your identity. What is it like to say that your parents paid for your college? How does that make you feel? And how would that have been different maybe if your government paid for your college? Like, I don't think that necessarily Europeans feel always as privileged when they're around all people who also the government could pay for their college. But we're surrounded by some people whose parents couldn't pay for their college, right?
And that's a great question too. How does it feel to have my parents have paid for my college? Well, it's certainly a mixed bag. I think on the surface, I do obviously feel immense gratitude. I feel incredibly fortunate and privileged that my parents had an eye always towards my education and invested in that enough. And I'm incredibly lucky about that. I think that I also feel a little bit uncomfortable too, because knowing that there are people that take out student loans, and knowing that not even that there's just some people, that is a huge phenomenon in the US. There's countless dollars of debt that have been racked up, and that is a massive socioeconomic issue that we face. It's an issue of privilege as well. I grew up very solidly middle class. My mom is a fourth grade teacher. My dad was an engineer. So we had enough to afford a 4-bedroom house. But it's not like we were taking luxury trips every year. It's not like we had the financial freedom to save for college, and that itself is a privilege. I think that there's probably something to be said about the system that causes us to that puts me into this position, right? That it forces a guilt complex, and it's another metric of privilege that other countries are fortunate not to have, right? Because in the United States, by making you pay for your education, you make knowledge and education a privilege, and you make it something that is capital constrained. And so you can develop resentment about how other people are more or less able and yeah, more or less able to afford that education easily or more freely, and how that impacts, like if you need to take on student loans, the millennial generation is still struggling to this day with their student debt. Maybe that changed with student debt forgiveness. I don't know, but anyhow, I think that just speaks to why we need to rethink the education system, especially in America. I think that while it does make you really work for that degree, if you have taken on student loans, if you need to pay for it yourself, the knowledge that your parents are paying for it, and they, like I know that was a significant portion of my parents' income, and so I really tried hard in college. And there's something to be said about that motivation. However, I think that does take away from the intrinsic motivation that the motivation should really be placed in, right? I think that because of that forces people to use education as a route because it is like a something that you need to pay a lot of money to do, and it's a high barrier to entry. It can influence your decision of what you want, of what you choose to study, and that maybe you're not actually truly studying what you would like to do, and maybe you're going oftentimes into like a higher paid discipline to pay off those student loans, or maybe instead of pursuing the knowledge for the knowledge's sake.
Yeah, I totally agree. I like the way you said that. I haven't really thought about that before, about how motivations change because we are or not paying, are not paying. But yeah, I can definitely imagine how, in my opinion, it would be better for students to study what they want to study for the reasons that they want to, and not try to think about what do their parents want them to study, when maybe that's not even so obvious. Like maybe their parents didn't even say it out loud, but they kind of assume, and they're holding on to old generations' values when those values might not even be relevant anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And, young people can make solid decisions for themselves without pressure and so on.
Yeah.
But yeah, really interesting to think about. Why don't we move away from this topic and talk about something that's coming up in other episodes of this podcast, your national identity.
Yeah.
So you are an American.
Yeah.
And you have Japanese and German heritage,
Mm-hmm.
and still some connection to those. And uniquely as an American, you actually know, this is pretty unique, I think, which country in Europe your heritage comes from.
Right.
And you actually feel attached to that,
Mm-hmm.
and so much that maybe you want to live in Germany in the future, get closer to that. That's super cool. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So it is certainly there's a lot of things that I want to say here, I suppose. My half Japanese, half German identity is definitely a very, very big part of who I am, and the fact that I grew up in the U.S. too. When I grew up, I knew that I was Japanese, obviously because my dad's straight from Japan, and Japan is a very homogenized country. So if you have Japanese ancestry, it's likely that it goes back very, very far, and there's not a whole lot of crossover. There's it, yeah. Versus on my mother's side, the ancestry is a quite muddled thing. But interestingly enough, that I knew that she was German, and that is a very unique thing. Like a lot of people in the United States, what does it mean to be an American, right? It means that unless you are Native American, your family has come here from other parts of the world at some point, and how far away you are, and how many generations you removed from that, the more you could lose sight of and lose touch with those roots. And also, I think it's maybe unique that we are specifically German, and not, as you may say, like a many flavors of vanilla, where you're British and Irish and French and so on and so forth. That is a commonality, especially if you take ancestry tests. But my mother is interesting because her father was American, and he went to Germany in about 1950s, met my grandmother, and then who was a German citizen, brought her back to the U.S. But my grandfather is very strongly German as well. There's a interesting. I learned about this later on in life, but my grandfather comes from a line of what's called German Russians, which is maybe like a group of Germans that very long ago decided to pick up from Germany and move to Russia, and stay together as Germans in like a tribe. Basically, like without going into too much history, but the Germans. Oh, sorry, I think it was Catherine the Great was German herself, and she got married into the Russian she got married into the Russian.
The royalty.
The royalty, exactly. And she was trying to increase, like, build the population of Russia, and so she made areas of Russia available for German settlement, and so, like, the Volga region in Russia became a huge migration center for Germans. And interestingly, the Germans had a sense of identity of their Germanness, and they kept that through several centuries. And then eventually, after, I think it was a changing of hands of the guard, those German Russians were pushed out of Russia because of the crackdown, I think, of atheists and whatnot. So they stayed together, and these German Russians then moved and into many other places. But my family went from Germany to Russia, and then to I think North Dakota, and then there's a very strong community of German Russians in the United States.
They went from Germany to Russia,
and then to the U.S. Right?
Okay. When they were kicked out.
Right.
Gotcha.
Or they had to find another life for themselves.
Wow.
And so there was a huge migration. I've seen like YouTube documentaries about the Germans from Russia in America, and it's a very interesting thing because they speak a very specific dialect of German Russian, and they have their own culture. But anyways, so all to say that my grandfather, being a part of that bloodline of German Russians, also had a very strong sense of German ancestry. So yeah, I grew up calling my grandmother Oma, my grandfather Opa. On my mom's side, on my dad's side, I called my grandparents Oji-chan and Oba-chan. And I went to Japanese school every Saturday, and I would watch Japanese TV growing up, because my dad was a first-generation immigrant to the United States, while the German ancestry was kind of a little bit, more removed in that sense, similar to how I was describing earlier, where the more generations you have in America, the further are you could be removed from that identity. But all the same, I knew that I was very strongly German and very strongly Japanese. And I think that that was very interesting growing up. I think that the hardest part of that was so I went to school in South Seattle. I went to elementary school in Kent and middle school in Kent, where the white people were the minority. It was a very, very diverse. I think Kent had the most diverse zip code in the U.S. at the time. So, being so diverse, you have a lot of different cliques, and oftentimes, as humans naturally do, we segregate ourselves by how we look, and so oftentimes there's like an Asian clique, and then there's other cliques from there, right? So I had an Asian-ish friend group, and it's a very weird thing to hang out with those Asians as a half Japanese and half white person, because I have a very strong sense of my Japanese identity. And then there's an Asian American identity, which is adjacent, but not quite the same. The Asian American diaspora in the United States is a very interesting dynamic to look into. A similar thing evolves where you either have a relatively recent first, second, third generation family that has come and they are still very, very attached to their Asian ancestry and they speak the language, or they became very Americanized along the way, right? But either way, there's an Asian American identity that was pervasive when I was growing up. And I always felt like I was, I knew that I was Asian, but not quite Asian enough. And that's hard to describe. I always think about this there's a rapper named Earl Sweatshirt. He had a bar that says he was too white for the black kids and too black for the whites. And that's exactly how I felt. You know, I got to high school and I had like a white people clique and I had an Asian people clique. And for the longest time, I would always feel about half comfortable with each, but always a little bit on the boundary, and especially maybe with the Asian American side, because, you know, the white side, they're a little bit more open, but there's like a shared closeness of an Asian American identity, and I always felt like I couldn't fully feel like I belonged to them. So that was really hard to come to grips with growing up, especially seeing other people and seeing how, you know, okay, if you're a white person, this is how you act, and this is like your life, and if you are an Asian person, then this is how you are, and this is how you act, and if you are a black person, then this is how you are, and that informs your experience, right? In a very simplistic sense.
Yeah, but it can be very simplistic the way that society tries to like treat itself and teach you. So
Right.
maybe it was a good exercise for you to not have an obvious place to go, and you had to ask yourself, like, who am I?
Exactly.
A little bit more than everyone else.
Right. I mean, and you're right. That ultimately led me to the like I had to learn how to be comfortable with the fact that I am not like you. So sometimes when you're in that dynamic, there's a tendency to lean into one side or the other, either abandon your Asianness or abandon your whiteness, and for the sake of trying to fit in. And because I never felt comfortable doing that, I resolved, like, eventually I came to be comfortable with the fact that I am not one or the other. I am both. I am like I'm not half of that, and which takes away from me being this whole person. You know what I mean? And learning how to carry both sides of me in those kinds of like groups, and still feel like I belonged. And if I didn't feel like I belonged, that it was okay, and that this isn't the only group for me. I think that part of that is because like your friend group is everything, and you have few friend groups when you are younger, and so the threat of not fitting in is much more prescient and stressful. But as I learned through more friend groups and meeting more people and through more diverse friend groups and whatnot, yeah, I learned how to not I, le- I learned how to be comfortable with that I was both, that I didn't need to let go of either side, that I could hold on to both and carry that identity with me, and that ultimately makes me a unique person. And it's okay that I think maybe what I'm trying to get at is like the struggle of not having one or the other was that I was looking for some like a blueprint of how to act, right? That I needed. I felt jealous that there were, role models of other ethnicities, and that there's a long storied heritage of particular ethnic groups, right? But being half Japanese, being half Asian, I didn't really have many people to look up to that looked like me, that had the same story as I did, that would inform, you know, that would that I could latch onto as a young kid, like what is a half white half Asian kid supposed to do? There's problems obviously with that question when you like on the whole, but at the time that was a very pressing question to me. And then I had to learn how to say, take pride in that identity and say, I this is a fairly recent thing, that there could even be a half white, half Japanese guy, and that gives me the opportunity to strive to be a role model for other people that are looking for role models that are maybe mixed ethnicity, and carve out a a lane for myself. And I think that coming to that realization that I needed to pave the way myself and try to be a trailblazer there, it helped light a fire under me to truly be myself and to own my identity and not feel like I had to ascribe to how everybody else was acting. Like, even though I didn't have something that could guide me in the moment, that set me free. And that was a big realization when I was very young. So yeah,
Yeah,
I don't
well,
know if that answered your question.
no, totally, totally. It's it's a theme that keeps coming up, and I really am starting to feel like getting rid of that blueprint in your mind is one of the first steps to like loving yourself and being yourself. Because even if you can define yourself as a white guy, a Japanese guy, you will never be that blueprint that you set yourself. And you maybe are just in a position of realizing that sooner than someone who fits into a box a little bit easier.
For sure. Granted, there is a little bit of acting how you look that you have to do, because you can't overstep your bounds, even though you know you don't necessarily have to fit the stereotype. It is not, especially right now in our current climate, like, it is not an option to try to act like something that you are not. You know what I mean? Like,
Or at least not that you something that you don't look like.
right, right. I mean, like a white person talking in African American vernacular English, right? Like, that is sure. Like, you're not acting like a white guy, but like there are so many problems with that, and so I think it's important to not like run wild and start like adopting a bunch of other cultures. You know what I mean? I think that is a problem that exists, especially in America. And I think it's good to get attracted to other cultures and to learn from them and to adopt aspects of them into yourself. But like Christina Aguilera, I think just today or yesterday, like she's gotten under fire for saying like, for like, what is it, appropriating culture. When she had like a Japanese phase and she had like a Latina phase. And she said, I don't regret anything because I'm Japanese. I feel Japanese, even though she's not Japanese at all. And as a Japanese guy, I'm like, there's so many. That's a very problematic statement to me. You know what I mean? To just like say you feel Japanese and then to claim that heritage as your own. You know what I mean? That is an example of something that I don't think that is permissible in today's day and age. But the point being, though, that the solution is like by letting go of the expectation to act like you are supposed to. The point being that you shouldn't run to other heritages and adopt them as your own to fill that gap. The void should be filled by your own personal character, and not borrowed from outside. You know what I mean?
Yeah, awesome. I mean, yeah, it definitely feels like trading one arbitrary or even, well, going from, if you can call the society you were born into arbitrary, and then jumping to another culture, it definitely doesn't seem productive in the way that we're talking about. And it is wrong in some of the ways you pointed out, or it can be. So, yeah, really, really interesting stuff to talk about and really interesting points, Makoto. This was an awesome conversation, and it's already run pretty long, so I think we're going to wrap it up there, unless you have any final thoughts.
No, not really. Go out and do great things. Whoever you are, wherever you are. And remember that nothing is permanent. You are who you think you are.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Makoto. And thank
Thanks,
you
Freddie.
to the listeners. Have a great day, and see you next time.
Makoto.